Hello. Thank you everyone for joining us today for the recognition of the International Day for Food Loss and Waste. We're very pleased that you could make it today to join us and be part of this conversation. It's more understanding what different organizations, especially international organizations here with us today, what are the current discussions around the food loss and waste, knowing fully well that food loss and waste is a global issue and got huge social, economic, and environmental impact to ourselves and our society. How can we really put resources together, put our thinking together to address this global issue? So I'm so pleased that you're able to make it to join us today. And to chair the session for today will be Lisa. Now, Lisa has a proven track record in the UK and globally as a board member and a serial entrepreneur, investment and banking professional, facilitating over 330 billion US dollars in capital. Lisa is passionate about delivering authentic, tangible impact, protecting our environment. And in the past 2 years, she has successfully supported the launch and scaling of 5 women-led impact ventures, including in health, agri-tech, and circular economy. Lisa is the CEO of Positive Planet UK. I'm so pleased that Lisa could join us today for this event and be able to chair the session. So I will hand over to you, Lisa. Thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you very much, Ify, and welcome. Welcome to everybody who's joining us today for what is clearly very important, essential, and timely webinar on how do we manage food waste, and even more broadly, what impact are we each individually, both professionally and personally, making in our strive to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of reduction of waste and also greater efficiency. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers over the next couple of hours. It's my honor to have the opportunity to chair. Just to quickly amend, PPUK helped to scale 55 ventures, I would say, not 5, in the last 2 years, many of whom are quite innovative in the areas of food and sustainability. And so with that, without any further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce each of the speakers that you'll be hearing from over the next hour. Please do stay on. I believe that we have a very efficient system for you to be submitting any questions or comments that you may have. So as they're speaking, please do make a note of what your questions are, get those questions in, because then at 1:45 p.m., we're going to be having a great panel discussion with all of the speakers together to address your questions. So it's a very interactive and valuable session. So first up will be Clementine O'Connor. Clementine O'Connor is a program management officer at United Nations Environment. She develops the Food Waste Index to enable reporting under SDGs 12.3, and also leads the UN environment activities on food waste and sustainable diets. So with that, it's an absolute pleasure, Clementine, over to you.
Hello there. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. Just let me get my slides up. Hope you can all see those okay. Thanks again for the invitation. It's great to be with you in Scotland and around the world to observe this second International Day of awareness on food loss and waste, to take stock of what we have achieved so far and what our plans are for the next 8 years or so under target 12.3. So I'll get you started. Food waste is a challenge of epic proportions, and it is urgent. Food waste has substantial environmental, social, and economic impacts, as you can see here. Throwing away food de facto means throwing away the resources that went into their production, both natural and financial. It means that we do not make available the food for food security, and we forego the circular economy opportunities by not putting the produce to their highest value use. On the contrary, food waste ends up in landfill a large part of the time, and there it goes to feed climate change instead. Food loss and waste reduction tackles hunger. In fact, 811 million people were affected by hunger in 2020. This is the new data that's just been published by the FAO, and 3 billion people are unable to afford a healthy diet. Food waste reduction makes a contribution across the 2030 agenda, with impacts on land, water, sustainable cities, as well as sustainable consumption and production. These benefits make food waste prevention a prime target for inclusion in COVID-19 recovery strategies. The UNEP emissions gap report shows us that we are heading for a temperature rise of 3 degrees Celsius this century. This is far beyond the Paris Agreement goals of keeping global warming to well below 2 degrees. Countries and companies can and should raise climate ambition by incorporating food loss and waste in their climate strategies and NDCs. To tackle this issue, Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 provides a clear framework to measure and track progress on food loss and waste reduction. It has separate objectives on loss and waste, and UNEP, as custodian of the food waste indicator, published the Food Waste Index report this year. The report provides global and country level food waste estimates based on best available data, and shares a common approach for countries to measure and report on food waste. It finds that nearly 1 billion tons of food sold to households, retailers, and the food service sector went to waste in 2019, and it finds that food waste is a global, not just a high-income country problem. In particular, it finds that in every country where food waste has been quantified, it is significant. Where the global average of 74 kilos of household food waste per year, this is greater than the weight of the average person in terms of the food waste that we each create. To tackle this, UNEP is launching regional food waste working groups that are kicking off in Africa, Asia Pacific, South America, and West Asia. These will address the data gap in middle and low income countries and catalyze action supporting member states in both quantifying food waste and in designing national food waste prevention strategies. They will be validated together with our partners at WRAP in the UK. Together with Liz Goodwin at the World Resources Institute and a wide range of partners, the Food is Never Waste Coalition was launched a week ago, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about that from Liz. And I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that UNEP is working with international banks, climate finance facilities, and family foundations to show how countries can deliver their food waste prevention strategies and put these into practice on the ground. And we will be hosting an event on this in a week's time. It would be great to see you all there. Thank you so much for your interest in this topic, and I wish you a great international food loss and waste day today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Clementine, for a great kickoff for our webinar today. And for those of you who are just joining us, please do remember to any questions or comments that you may have, please do feed them in to us so that Clementine and others can address it in the panel session coming up in 45 minutes. Okay, and so with that, it's my pleasure to go on to introduce Dr. Liz Goodwin. Liz joined the World Resources Institute in 2016 as a senior fellow and director of food loss and waste. So clearly she is perfect for today. She's an advocate for the UN Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 again, which we heard about from Clementine, which aims to cut global food waste in half by 2030. So that's in 9 years, call it in 8 years. So let's see where we are at with that. In 2017, Liz was appointed chair of London, which was formerly known as the London Waste and Recycling Board by the Mayor of London, which is another fantastic partnership for all the London boroughs to improve waste and resource management in the capital and accelerate our transition to a low carbon circular economy. So with that, it's my absolute pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Liz Goodwin. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much. And let me just share my screen. I think you can see that. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the global perspective, and then at the very end, I'll just touch on the city perspective, because I think there are some quite interesting read across between those two. You're also going to find out that I repeat some of the things that Clementine has just said, but then I don't think it's a problem, because I think actually it's really important that we keep banging on about these numbers because they are so shocking. So, it's estimated that we lose or waste around 1/3 of all the food that's between production and our plates. It costs nearly $1 trillion every year. Food loss and waste represents 8% of greenhouse gas emissions. There are estimates of around 10%. I mean, that's just a shocking number, and when we're trying to reduce food loss and waste, and it means that it's something that all of us can do something about. And we're wasting 1/4 of all the water that's used in agriculture. And food loss and waste happens everywhere. it happens right through from production, through handling, storage, through the whole processing, distribution, and then by us as householders in our own homes. And there used to be this idea that actually food waste, household food waste, was a problem in the developed world, and it was the problem was in developing countries was all around production losses. And there was this myth that the two, you had a shift as you went from undeveloped to developed about where the food loss or waste occurred. But interestingly, in the last year, we've had a couple of new insights, new reports, one of which Clementine's just talked about, which have dispelled that myth. So the food index, waste index report that Clementine talked about has really shown that actually household food waste and food waste at the sort of retail and hospitality and household end is as much a problem in middle income countries as it is in higher income countries. And the other report was done by WWF, and that one showed that actually farm losses occur everywhere, including in the developed world. So we can no longer just sort of say, well, that's a developing world issue and this is a developed world issue. And at the same time, 1 in 9, 1 in 10 people go to bed hungry every day. And that's shocking that we as a civilized world, especially on this International Day of Awareness, it's shocking that we allow that to happen. We're throwing away a third of it, and yet we've got this high number of people who are food insecure. So it's already been mentioned, we've got SDG target 12.3, which is to focus on reducing food loss and halving food waste at retail and consumer ends. And I'm one of the champions for SDG 12.3, and that's essentially a coalition of leaders drawn from public sector, private sector, NGOs, civil society, global coverage, all parts of the supply chain. And we are committed to trying to help ensure the world achieves SDG by 12.3 by 2030. And we've only got 8-9 years to go, which is not very long. In fact, yesterday we had our annual event and we announced the formation of a Champions Assembly, which is going to be a mechanism for broadening that level of support. So it's not just the coalition of leaders, but it actually becomes a far bigger way of everybody who has a passion for addressing food loss and waste, including member states and private sector companies, can actually learn, share from each other, and discuss some of the big issues. And our overall approach is basically really simple strategy: target, measure, act. Set your target. We've got the SDG. It sets the ambition, and that motivates action. But fundamentally, what gets measured means you can manage it. If you don't have measurement, you don't have data, you don't know where your problems are, as soon as you start measuring, you can actually start to make progress. And that immediately drives into action, which is fundamentally what's important. And that strategy works at all levels. So we want as many companies to start measuring and take action. We want as many countries to start measuring and taking action. Wherever you are, as many cities to start measuring and take action, because it works at all levels. And Clementine mentioned the Food Systems Summit. We had a huge number of people involved in pulling together the ideas around food loss and waste. And I was co-leading that work, and we came up with this cluster of initiatives, right through from diagnostics and measurement, through addressing farm losses, addressing issues in the supply chain, household food waste, and then making the food system more circular, all underpinned by monitoring and financing. So that was a cluster of initiatives that, again, can be picked up by this coalition that Clementine talked about, but picked up by any company, any government, and they can pick out the things that are relevant to them. And I think we are seeing far more company engagement in this whole issue. There's an increasing number of companies that are setting targets and measuring. This is just some examples. And I think it's really good to see that sort of momentum building. There's been far less engagement by countries to date, but I think the Food Systems Summit has started to shift that, and we're starting to see countries really starting to prioritize food loss and waste as a big issue. One of the reasons why companies are so interested in this, or increasingly interested in it, they're suddenly waking up to the fact that there is a very good financial business case. We did a review across about 2,500 sites to look at the business case for investing in food loss and waste reduction. And there was a median return of 14 to 1. So for every dollar invested, the company got $14 back. And these were generally low cost or no cost investments. So it wasn't that you had to spend millions to achieve a benefit. You could just do some simple process changes or some simple low cost changes that resulted in going straight to your bottom line. And then if you think a little bit about the London perspective and the at a city level, all those things in that cluster are still relevant. So London, this is just a sort of snapshot of some of the things that we've got going on in London. So we've got a program called Food Wave, which is about increasing the citizen awareness and engagement. We've got a flagship initiative, which is actually running some pilots to really try out things that work and then hopefully be able to share that learning. We've got a program that works with SMEs in the food sector to help them to actually make their businesses more circular and to reduce food waste. And we're going to run a pilot with the London Borough focused on household food waste. And then finally, looking at food served in schools, how can you reduce the environmental impact? And, you know, help encourage the younger generation and the generation of the next leaders to understand the issue of food waste and to try and do something about it. So that's what I was going to say. I'm very happy to take any questions. If you please put them in the Q&A box or whatever, and we'll get onto them at the panel session. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Liz. You know, I'm getting more and more excited as we go on. And sorry, I'm in very sunny Scotland today. I've been trying to reduce the shades, but I'll soon be off the screen and on to our next speaker for today. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Folarin Alonge. Professor Alonge is professor at University of UO, Department of Agricultural and Food Engineering. He is a registered professional engineer with the Council for the Regulation of Engineering in Nigeria. He has served as a national executive member of the Nigerian Institution for Agricultural Engineers since 2001 and has served on several committees of the American Society of Agricultural and Biological Engineers since 2005. He's also the immediate past president of CIGR, International Commission of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering. And so with that, it's my absolute pleasure to hand it over to Professor Alonge. Thank you. Professor, I can see you on the screen. For those on the technical side, if we could just spotlight him and proceed, Professor, over to you.
Can you see my screen?
I just removed the spotlight from myself, but yeah, here you are. Great, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Sorry, a little bit of connectivity problem. Good morning, all. Is delighted to be here. Immediate past president of CIGR. Let me just share my screen so that we see. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, Professor. Go ahead. Thank you.
You can. Thank you. Well, just a brief outline of what I'll be discussing, a little bit about CIGR and the losses, the rest kind of losses and waste. Part of my background is just there, no time to go into those details.
Please, can you put in presentation mode, please? Presentation
okay.
mode.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So CIGR is a world organization that is made up of regional organizations and national organizations. And basically one of the objectives of CIGR is to serve on a worldwide basis and through its members the needs of humanity, fostering mutual understanding, improvement, and rationalization of sustainable biological production systems while protecting nature and environment, managing landscape through the advancement of engineering. We have various sessions in CIGR. And one of the sessions that has to do with the subject of our discussion is section 6, which is basically the post-harvest technology and bioprocess. And the objective basically of that group is to advance and promote the application of engineering principles and technology in post-harvest handling and processing of agrifood products. Now, in this session, we look at things that have to do with food waste and food loss. Is one of the things, the area of our interest, apart from others that has to do with physical properties, non-destructive sensors, safety. But one other area that we look into is food losses and waste, treatment and management. But not much has been done in terms of concentration on food losses and waste. But now that this is coming up more strongly, we will take a cursory look at what you can do as a world body in order to reduce losses and waste on a global basis. So that is a little bit about CIGR. Every year, rich countries waste about 222 million tons of food, which is almost like the entire food production in sub-Saharan Africa. A third of world food is wasted on a yearly basis, which amounts to 1.3 billion tons of wasted food. And that is almost like $1 trillion US dollars. If you look at the subject of our discussion of food loss and food waste, food loss takes place from production, post-harvest, processing stages, and distribution, while food waste happens at retail and consumption level. Then the developing countries like Africa, South America, and Asia, the problem is more of food loss. Food loss is more prevalent, and you see that orange color, that is where food loss is prevalent. While food waste is more prevalent in developed countries like America, upper part of Europe, and Australia. So that is what you see there. And then working together to cut food waste and loss is something that must be done. It's part of the Sustainable Development Goals. The number 12 Sustainable Development Goals, it has to do with responsible consumption and production. And one of the things that is targeted at is to see how we can reduce the global waste by half by the year 2030. That is one of the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's need for us to look at that. When we talk about food loss, what is it? Food loss is basically the decrease in the quantity or quality of food resulting from decisions and actions by food suppliers in the chain, excluding retailers, food service providers, and consumers. That is food loss in itself. And there are various kinds of losses, physical losses, and these are measured in terms of weight loss. The damage caused by insects, molds, mites, rodents, and other pests affect the physical quality of grains and the chemical composition. So even at production level, at processing level, there are physical losses caused by insects. Then also like biological losses. These are damage to quality caused by biological agents through contamination and decomposition. And also chemical losses. These are nutritional losses as a result of changes by biodegradation and insect damage during storage. And this insect activity leads to deterioration in quality. So there are physical losses, there are biological losses, and there are chemical losses. That is just a typical thing you see in several places where these losses takes place. Then other losses that happens is there are feed losses. And these feed losses occurs when crops are planted either during weeding, misuse of fertilizers, and this may occur when the crop is over mature and are not harvested on time. Shatter loss in case of grains, and also some attack by insects. So there are feed losses that happens during production. Then harvesting losses during harvest. This comes also through mechanical damages, bruises during harvesting. It may also occur as a result of poor handling methods. Then, of course, processing losses. This is typical thing you see in some of the sub-Saharan African states when tomatoes are stacked upon one another. Of course, by the time this gets to the end users, the retail end, many of them are already spoiled and wasted. So then storage or preservative losses, then packaging losses, transportation losses. In cost of transportation, losses do take place from one place to the other. And the handling losses too, this comes either as a result of wrong use of tools or whatever. So there are handling losses. So this is typical also. You find this in several of the sub-Saharan African countries. This is rice processing, and some losses do take place in the course of processing rice, as you see here. What do we do to contain food losses? That is the question we need to, because there are losses in each of the process, starting from production to handling, to processing, to storage, to packaging, and even up to distribution. So there are losses. What do we do to curtail these losses? Basically, food loss is common to low-income countries like sub-Saharan African countries, Central Asia, Western Asia. What to do is to see how investments can be in terms of local investments to prevent these losses. Then a little bit of education here and there to educate people on how to avoid food losses. And of course, cold chain when possible, especially highly perishable products. Cold chain, and of course, improved packaging. These are some of the things that are being done or should be emphasized more in terms of food losses. Then improved market facilities. Then food waste. It refers to decrease in quantity or quality of food resulting from decisions and actions by retailers, because food waste starts from the retailers in the research to consumers. When I was growing up, my mother used to tell us, you don't waste food. Some people don't have food to eat. So, but this is more prevalent in developed countries like America, Canada, Australia, and food waste is not something that is very common in sub-Saharan Africa, because many people are even hungry. They don't even have the food to eat. So the little they have, they just have to keep it and consume the food. So food waste is more prevalent. That is not to say that in sub-Saharan African nations and some parts of the developing countries, there are still food waste. Some people still waste food, though not at the consumption level. Maybe at the retailers level, there are food waste that comes up at such levels. So you see this kind of thing coming up. Food waste is the worst, dumbest environmental problem. It's been said that this is the world dumbest environmental problem. And the scale is enormous. And what you see is that it's been said, if global waste was a country, it would have been the third largest greenhouse gas emitter after the US. You see that graph? China leading in gas emission, US follow. Food waste is like the third, then followed by India. And when you look at food waste, you can have it at food loss, and food waste. Food loss, like I said earlier, starts from production, harvesting, processing, but the waste in itself starts from distribution, various restaurants, domestic consumption at various homes, also things to see in terms of food waste. But at the consumption level, it's minimal because many people don't even have food to eat.
Professor, thank you very much. I'm going to just ask you to wrap up now because we're going a little bit over time. And so if anybody does have any questions for Professor Alonge, if you can just please make a note of that. And if there's any remaining comments that he wants to make, I'm going to ask you to hold that for the panel session. Thank you so much. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Iain Gulland. Iain is the founding CEO of Zero Waste Scotland and was the director of its predecessor program, WRAP Scotland. Iain has also worked with recycling startups in the public, private, and third sectors, and led the Community Recycling Network for Scotland until 2008. I am delighted to say that Iain was also named the most influential person in waste and resource efficiency in the UK, not just Scotland, by Resource Magazine in 2014, and was awarded the Chartered Institution of Waste Management Fellowships in 2016. It's my absolute pleasure, and I've known Iain before from other programs he supported. It's an absolute pleasure to now hand it over to Iain Gulland. Thank you so much.
Hi, and thank you. Thank you for the welcome. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm recognizing that food waste and food loss is a global problem, both in terms of environmental, economic, and social implications. What I'll probably just cover is what it means for Scotland, if I may, and give you a kind of quick snapshot of what we're doing about all of this here in Scotland. So a little bit about Zero Waste Scotland. We exist to lead Scotland to use products and resources responsibly. We're fully funded by the Scottish Government. We deliver on the Scottish Government's national targets on policies around circular economy and resource efficiency, as well as we do other work around energy efficiency and low carbon heating. We've been pioneering and certainly raising awareness of actions to tackle food waste for the last decade. We've led on campaigns with consumers. We've supported the development of research into behaviours and barriers, and we've looked at economic opportunities as well and working directly with businesses, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. We've also been involved in rolling out a national food waste recycling infrastructure to over 80% of households in Scotland, and investing in the associated anaerobic digestion and in-vessel composting that maximises the value from that collection infrastructure. But we're here to talk about food waste reduction. So the Scottish Government have set a target of 33% reduction by 2025. We helped them put a plan in place called the Food Waste Reduction Action Plan, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So that plan was launched in 2019, and I'll give you just a sense of some of the progress. But first, everybody likes to throw some numbers around. Our numbers in Scotland are significantly huge as well in relation to a country with around about 5 million population. So each year in Scotland, we throw out nearly 1 million tonnes of food waste across all parts of the economy. Over 60% of that actually is in the household, and that relates to about £1 billion of loss to the national economy. And for a householder, that's about £470 a year. So these are huge numbers. They impact on, as I say, all parts of the society, from individual citizens, communities, producers, and retailers. We look at the hospitality industry. Our estimations that it costs the hospitality industry over £170 million a year. That's equivalent of 1 in every 6 meals that are prepared is actually wasted. So for an industry which has obviously gone through considerable impact over the last couple of years, that's something that is just unsustainable. So clearly, and another thing I like to throw in here about food waste at the home, because everybody's very exercised about plastics, quite rightly, single-use plastics and people reducing that. But in terms of impacts, household food waste is almost 3 times the climatic impact than plastics. So it's something we should bear in mind, that really, absolutely tackle plastics, but food waste is even more significant and even more important that we actually tackle this. So we all need to eat. So it means that we all have a role to play in this, no matter who we are. We've obviously been working on this, as I've said, for some time. We have made progress, but it has been slow progress, to be fair. We've seen about a 6% reduction since 2009, between 2009 and 2014. So on the back of that, the Scottish Government, as I said, launched or announced a target of a 33% reduction by 2025, which is seen as a stepping stone to the global target of 50% reduction by 2030. And we developed an action plan with the Scottish Government to show how we would get there. So, but the action plan isn't so much about just hitting targets, it's about addressing the more fundamental issue of an attitude to food waste. And the wider role that food production and consumption can play in tackling climate change. So it echoes everything that others have talked about. The 4 key areas of our action plan are around improved monitoring. So obviously, going back to the thing, if we're not measuring it, you can't monitor it, you can't really take action. Leadership is the second thing. So we want leaders both across the whole society, but mainly in the food system to be talking about this, reporting on progress, and ultimately engaging around how do we develop the skills to tackle this at scale and at pace. The third element is obviously public engagement and communication, hugely important. And the fourth element for action is around how do we support others to take action. So again, that's about supporting businesses individually and collectively. How do we support innovation and further research so we can actually target the kind of hotspots. So I'll just say a little bit, just to give you some of the flavour. I mean, Liz has already mentioned a lot of the initiatives that London is taking forward. We have similar initiatives. We engage with citizens through the Love Food, Hate Waste programme. One of the successes we see is training individuals. So as well as using, the website and social media to get general messages out, we're actually out there talking to individuals and communities and in businesses around food waste, how to reduce that using things like better planning, shopping lists, use of storage, freezers, getting over the kind of myths around what you can and cannot freeze, cooking leftovers. And our evaluation of that programme is that for everyone, if everybody we've trained has experienced food waste reduction, but not only that, they've actually shared the tips with friends, family and colleagues, and we've estimated for every one person we train, there's another 40 people who are getting kind of cascaded training through that program. So that's about 40,000. So we've trained about 1,000 so far. Obviously during COVID this became quite difficult, but prior to that we trained about 1,000 people. So that's 40,000 people. So that's the kind of thing that we'd like to scale up, and we're currently working with one of the local authorities in Scotland to really see how we could scale that, identify further opportunities to cascade that through, and then monitor that and really see what significant can be if we can do that in a place-based opportunity. We've launched a Good to Go campaign, which is basically a doggy bag program with a number of restaurants, hospitality businesses, and again, this was a way of engaging both with the public around food waste, the opportunity to take food home and have that later, but also a way of reducing costs for individual businesses through food waste disposal costs. We also work with schools. We've developed a number of initiatives and toolkits for in-classroom teaching around food waste, matched to the national curriculum, and we also work directly with the local authorities who run the schools in terms of tutoring to reduce the impact of that at meal times. We have a dedicated business support service, one-to-one support, and through a kind of food-based hub online program, particularly targeted at SMEs and the manufacturing production, but also hospitality, but also in the public sector as well. A big engagement we have is with the NHS, National Health Service, on food waste, and that is very much following that line about target, measuring and act, and supporting businesses through not just consultant support, but also through funding and to take forward initiatives or to take adaptations and training within their establishments for staff. We've also, obviously, in response to a lot of the things that happened early in COVID, we developed a national platform for food redistribution from hospitality industries and the like out to wider society, and supporting a number of third sector organisations within that as well. In terms of innovation, we have we've supported the collection infrastructure for food waste, which we hope is the unavoidable food waste. But we're also looking to support other businesses to look at what to do with that, to maximise the value of that. We've worked with an inventive company called Cellucomp, which extracts tiny cellulose fibres from the root vegetable waste to make everything from paint to cosmetics. Another is a company called Revive Eco, which is turning waste coffee grounds into fertiliser. They've also working on this as a more sustainable alternative to palm oil, which obviously would have considerable impacts in other parts of the world. We've also been pioneering insect farming, which again is looking at, how do we substitute, how do we use insect larvae to provide a substitute instead of importing soya from places like Brazil, where I'm sure we all understand the pressures on the ecosystem that those agricultural practices for soya are having. Vertical farming as well, we're certainly interested in that for all the obvious reasons in terms of reducing water and energy use, plus potential transportation impacts and the creation of more resilient supply chains and increasing local production and consumption. So it's also having a significant impact on food waste projects that we're working with, as there's not so much, there's less opportunity for food losses to be left on farm, and which is often one of the aspects of food loss that is not calculated when we think about certainly food waste in Scotland. So, as I said, it's all about collective action. We recognise we need to all work together. We think, obviously, thinking about it in the round and the systems approach, thinking about even how do we get the material that is unavoidable back into the soil in terms of nutrients. There's obviously, we think, an opportunity obviously for carbon sink, but looking at that, how that natural balancing ecosystem, which we if we show it more respect and help control it could help us control the climate and allow us to not just survive but to thrive for generations to come. But there's clearly an opportunity with that narrative to engage with people, not just around food waste, but to connect people back to the soil and the natural environment for them, for not just for their own health and prosperity, but for those of their communities. I recognise, as I said, it is about collaborating. What we're doing in Scotland probably mirrors quite a lot of what other nations are doing. We do recognise we need to scale up and learn from others. It is about system thinking now. I think we all recognise that, and how we can all work more collaboratively around the whole supply chain.
Iain, sorry, I'm just going to interject for just 1 second. I'm going to ask, hold that thought there. All the panelists, if you can just come back so that we can now go into our panel session, and then Iain, I'll just ask you to quickly wrap up your final point, and then we will go to a lot of questions that have been coming in for the panel. So I think we are missing just Clementine. If you can come back. Okay, great.
My final point was about leadership, because that is the one area I think that we are still not as progressing as much as we'd like. It's still, there are a lot of people talking about food waste, but sometimes it's not on the public platforms, particularly in the food and drink industry. It's still, talked about more quietly. Individual companies recognise that they have issues around food loss and want to talk about it with us on a one-to-one basis, but I still don't think it's getting the profile that it deserves. And everybody's spoken about is the biggest contribution to climate change in terms of the global emissions. It's got significant social impacts in terms of feeding people. And I guess my ask is, as we all march towards COP26 here in Scotland and Glasgow in a few weeks' time, that we make sure that food waste, the need to reduce food waste at a global level is really significantly given the profile it needs.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Iain, for a very extensive presentation there. In summary, we know what the stats are. We know that there's a lot of food waste going on. The key question is, what are we doing about it? And to just follow up from Iain's last point, it's about also leadership. So I'm going to just quickly ask each of the other panelists, Liz, there are some specific questions for you, Clementine, Folarin, if you can just give me one, not stats about how much food waste is out there, we know that, but how can we address it? And specifically, what is your institution doing to address it, picking up on Iain's point around leadership. So first I'll go to Liz, then I'll go to Clementine, then I'll go to Folarin. Just one thing that you are doing.
So I'm a champion for SDG 12.3. I've just spent the last year basically badgering as many member states as I can to get them to take leadership. So I completely agree with it, Iain, we need more leadership, but persistence by all of us to make sure that the leaders we interact with actually play their bit as well.
Okay, so yours is about advocacy in one sense. Clementine, over to you. You can give me one specific thing that you're doing.
Thanks. One specific thing that we're doing is really working with middle and lower income countries, specifically on food waste, because contrary to popular assumption, the data that we have on household food waste in Africa, Asia and South America are showing very high amounts of household food waste. And so we're working to understand the causes and the drivers of that, and to see how we can work with those countries to quantify and to reduce that.
When you say work with the countries, do you mean, are you working with the governments of these countries in specific?
Yes, so we have regional working groups where we work with about 8 countries in each of the regions to provide a technical support there.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. Folarin, if you can just give me one example of how you are specifically implementing, right, in terms of food waste reduction. And then from there, I'll go to questions for each of the panelists from the audience. I think you are, okay.
The session 6 has to do with post-harvest technology and bioprocess. One of the areas of interest which we've been addressing is food waste and food loss. And this comes through capacity building and the training program we organized. In our institution in Nigeria, we are also collaborating with CIGR to start a webinar series to be able to educate people and make them to be aware there is need to curtail losses, among other things, and waste. So we started, among other things we are doing currently, and that food loss and food waste will be brought into focus in order to enlighten our people the need to curtail waste in all of these areas, from production through processing, handling, and packaging, even to the consumer level.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to just go through a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. Some of them are for specific speakers, and some of them are general, in which case I'll just ask one of you. So the first question is for Liz. Hi, Liz. Can you talk more about the 8 pilot projects to reduce food waste from London?
So they haven't actually been set up yet, but this is part of our London being a flagship city as part of our work with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So the first stage will be to do some research into looking into where some of the opportunities are. And then we plan to run 8 pilots. But I mean, if anybody wants to find out more, there'll be stuff going on the website, but I can put them in touch with the food team if anyone wants to get in touch. My email address was on the last slide, so anyone can just email me.
Yeah. So a question did come in, and it's the usual question, you know, how can we find out more about the various programs after this webinar? How can we connect with you? Obviously, you can connect with people via LinkedIn. Question to Ify, will the various presentations, which include people's contact details, well, I guess it's also a question to the speakers. Are you willing to share the presentations with the public to the extent that they would like to receive it? Okay, and Iain, you didn't have a presentation, but you had you didn't have a physical presentation, but you had a great verbal presentation. For people that want to follow up with you or your team, what's the best way to do this?
Yeah, so the best way, and I can share that if you want, our website. I mean, obviously that's the entry point. There's a lot of information, a lot of toolkits and such like materials that people can access. Talks about how do you get support. Obviously, a lot of this is for businesses based in Scotland and the like. So that's and there's an entry point there. There's obviously a contact sheet as well. People want to get more information, quite happy.
I guess, Iain, is there somebody within, how is Zero Waste Scotland organized? Do you have, and I had to write down your point that you made about 33%, 30% reduction by 2025 in terms of food reduction. That's a target that you're supporting, and that food waste is 3 times the climatic impact than plastic. So that really resonated with me. Within Zero Waste Scotland, is there a particular division that focuses on food waste and then another on plastics? How is it, how can we personalize that interaction for them?
So for ease, I mean, we don't quite call it the food team, but there is a set number of people working on food waste action plans. So the action plan, you can download the government's action plan from our website too. It sets all the activities that are involved in it. We have a team of people working on that. We work in partnership with some other agencies as well. So it's not just us that's delivering that. Yeah, I have a food team, and I have a number of plastic specialists, for a better word, who are working on a number of issues around plastic reduction. But there is massive synergies as an organisation like ours you would imagine, because single-use plastics, or the use of plastics, is critical to preserving food in many circumstances as well. So there's a lot of linkage, and in fact quite a lot of the food companies we work with are interested in reducing plastics as well. So they have their own, they're part of the national programme, the Courtauld Agreement, that we work with across the whole of the UK. So there is synergies across a lot of what we do around plastics and food waste.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just try to get in the I think 10 minutes we have left, a couple of these questions here. There was a question from Kadu: who are the countries causing most food loss? Is it developed or developing ones? And why aren't developed countries allocating their surplus to poor populations? I think that was covered already in some of the presentations, unless anybody else wants to add to that. I mean, I think to answer the last question in terms of why aren't the ones that are the biggest culprits not allocating their surplus to countries that need it, I think that's a political and ethical question, which we probably don't have time to get into now. So just moving on to some of these other questions. How are we going to get the lecture materials? Okay, that's already been addressed. Question from Finlay Gilmore, and it's not for anybody in particular, so if you want to answer it, just put your hand up. With that amount of food waste coming from the average household, how do you believe it is best to impress the importance on reducing food waste to people that often only see abundance? And I think that's back to, I believe a couple of you spoke about attitude, awareness and attitude, because obviously, you know, and I think the number that Iain mentioned was something close to 500 pounds per year that's going towards food waste. Obviously, that's a lot more depending on your how much money you spend on food, but everybody knows that food waste is not something that's good, but yet they do it. So so I think that's a really good question. How do we actually change? I mean, people know that it's bad for the environment, it's a drain on resources, and you know they're losing money. So how can you change the attitudes?
Sorry to jump in. I think people we think, so what I'm going to say is I don't think enough people think it's important for the environment or that it's an environmental impact. I mean, that statistic about it's almost 3 times the impact of plastics. I mean, when we go and promote that, when we go live on radio or television and talk about that, people are surprised. The people who are interviewing you go, oh, is that right? I didn't realize that. I don't think, you know, people actually realize that absolute impact. You might see it in terms of scraping the stuff into the bin, and obviously we have food waste collection infrastructure, but they never see the impact of that through the supply chain, the embedded carbon. And I think that is a narrative that I think we should get out to people, because people do actually want to take action against climate change. It's been proven now. Individuals, you know, they're thinking more seriously about what can I do, what little thing can I do as a householder, as a consumer, to really, you know, increase the activity around climate change. The food waste, it's just so easy. You know, we can all do it. There's simple things that we can all do at home in terms of behaviours, in terms of how we store, how we plan, how we interact with our communities if we have too much, you know, and just, you know, so it is something that can be done. But I don't think we have that conversation with people. We still talk about recycling, we still talk about flying, we still talk about electric vehicles, we talk about all the things which are naturally flow off.
Yes, Liz, I know that. I'm trying to come to you. Thank you, Iain. So we have about 10 minutes left. Liz has to drop off. Liz, I'm going to ask you before you drop off to just make one final point again about, and just following on from Iain's point about how can we get the awareness from an environmental and climate impact resonating more with people. And then Clementine, I'm going to come to you because I know you also had some thoughts around this.
I think that's it. Iain's absolutely right that people don't see the impact because it's a bit of food and it's, they can go out to the shop and get it again. We have to keep reminding them, let's try and find all the analogies we can. The 3 times plastic is great. The comparison to flying is great. We have to find better descriptors, and I think it's also important to make people feel that this is something that all of us can do something about. An awful lot of people sit there thinking, well, climate change is so big, it requires big companies to do things, requires governments to do things. I can't do anything about it. Tackling food loss and waste is something that every single one of us can do. And that's the message we've got to keep trying to get across.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've got to go.
That's fine, Liz. Thank you so much. Clementine?
Yes, great, thanks. Yeah, I thought that this was a greater question, so I just wanted to add something to that there. I think that every culture finds food waste morally offensive, but most people assume they don't waste food until they're aware of the quantity that's coming out of their homes. They're not thinking about that. So I think that's one first step. And I think the next thing is to find the easy ways to help people to take action. So there are 2 things that we're talking about today. One is to have a use it up meal once a week, where you use the ingredients you have in your fridge and you put them all in one dish and you clean out your fridge. Works great. And the next is to have a shelf in your fridge that's marked eat me first. So all the things that are about to go to waste or that they're open already and they need to go first, that
wouldn't work in my household. My fridge would be constantly, they would just keep moving the signs around and eat me.
But the research from our partners at Oz Harvest show that these are high impact, easy things that people can put in place in their homes that can help them to have a quick impact there. And I also just wanted to add that there are a variety of entry points to this. So in some countries we work in, they are approaching food waste reduction from a food security angle. There are others where it's a climate imperative. This is something that has such a range of impacts that you have to find the right approach to the people that you're talking to there. Thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, it's also about just personalizing it, and I think that, as we, as the awareness becomes greater and greater, to be honest, when people start to see the impact of climate, and how is it impacting your daily life, then they're going to start to care more about how they're contributing to it. Just a comment to our audience who's listening, and unfortunately you can't engage directly with us, but we are here. We are taking your questions. We do have 5 minutes left for this session. So if you have anything else that you want to add to this conversation or any questions for any of our panelists, please, just go ahead and type it in, get it in there, and then I'm sure they'd be delighted to respond to you. Folarin, any final comments from you?
In this part of the world, what we have more is food losses than the waste. Though from the waste end, the issues has to do with the retailers and from transportation and handling. If that can be curtailed in terms of helping those retailers, and we have a kind of cold chain to store their food products, that will minimize waste. But at the consumer level, at various homes, maybe though the waste is not much, but then a kind of way of keeping the food in a refrigerator and instead of pouring them away, though that is not, it's even less, but more of the waste is more with the retailers during course of transportation or by the time they keep them in their stores, and some of them don't have storage facilities to actually do that. And so those things get wasted. But more of the losses comes from the production end. What happens from the feed during production, during processing, and the various processing methods, the various handling methods. If we have improved processing methods, improved handling methods, that can help to be able to curtail. Of course, there has to be awareness of this. You have to know that you don't waste food. You have to minimize the losses, both from the production, for the processing, even to up to packaging. If that is curtailed and minimized, that will help a lot to reduce the losses at that end. Because from this end, this part of the world, it has to basically do with more of the losses than the waste. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Folarin. Just a quick note, we do still have a couple of minutes for questions, so please do send them in. But after this panel ends, which will be in about 3 minutes, we're going to go and we're going to have a break for about 10 minutes. Go get your coffee. If you're at home, go to the shelf that says "Eat Me First," etc. And we're going to be having an exciting video from IntelliDigest on their own global food loss and waste tracker. So we've been talking about what can we do to help address the problem. And I'm so excited about IntelliDigest because they are actually addressing, to Folarin's last point, addressing food loss across the value chain. So they have a app, and they haven't, by the way, haven't told me to talk about this, but I'm just so excited about it. I'm talking about it. They have an app which will help you individually in terms of how can you track what you're doing and how can you reduce your own food loss. So that's the Global Food Loss and Waste Tracker System. Stay on the line, and they're gonna have a video about that. And then they also are leading in terms of innovation for how can you reuse and recycle food for various corporations, etc. So they're dealing with both individuals as well as corporates. So with that, we have just 2 minutes. I haven't seen any more questions come in. Just any final words from Iain and Clementine, and after those final notes, we will go to break. And again, don't go away. Please see the video.
I think Clementine mentioned a few initiatives that really make a difference. I mean, the one that I always go back to is, certainly in our part of the world, is the impact for people who use a shopping list on a regular basis. It's proven that, if you use a shopping list, you'll save on average £140, against somebody who doesn't use a shopping list. Just use a shopping list, £140 is a lot of money. And the food that you're not wasting. So, but also recognizing that there's a systems approach to this. It's not all about the householder. Certainly there's behaviours they could change that are quite obvious, but we mustn't forget that their shopping habits, the way that we shop, the way that we're time poor, the way our society runs. I mean, we saw considerable changes during the pandemic, during the lockdown, where people. Obviously, our shopping habits all changed, and not trying to hide from the tragedy, of the early lockdown, but all our shopping habits were changed. We had more time at home because we were at home, and we saw significant reductions in food waste, which we'd all love to see. But as soon as we start to come back out of lockdown, particularly in Scotland, we're now seeing an increase in food waste because we're back to busy lives again. We're back to not having enough time. Our shopping is going back to how it was before. We're eating out a little bit more on a more kind of ad hoc basis. So, and okay, that's great because we're coming through the pandemic, but little things like that. So again, that whole interaction with people like retailers, with the food system, food producers, thinking about that system. How can we even make it easier for people, enable citizens to do the right thing? Certainly there's things they can do around storage and plate sizes and stuff like that, but I think we need to look at the whole system, which is obviously encouraging that we all are now beginning to talk about it. And the one thing I know Liz has dropped off, I think that we do miss, you talked a lot about countries being involved in terms of this, But how do we get municipalities, individual councils involved in this as well? Quite often they think their job is just to collect a thing, collect the waste, that's their job. But how could they facilitate some of those initiatives that Liz was talking about in London? How can they do them at a local level? How can they facilitate communities coming together, and some of the local retailers and local food production companies who are all very interested in this space, want to take part, and there's a kind of enabling, facilitating role that municipalities could do. And I think they're overlooked sometimes, the role that they could actually have in generating higher impact.
Absolutely. I think it varies very much from council to council. I mean, I have a home and I live in London. I also live in Scotland. My borough is Lewisham, a borough in Southeast London, where they're actually very active and launching various programs. But again, it's not consistent, and that's something that also we should be speaking to our MPs about and councilmen about. So with that, great wrap for this segment. Thank you so much to all of the speakers and the panelists for information, motivation, inspiration on this topic. We now have a 15-minute video break, so everybody please stay online for a video from IntelliDigest, and please remember to come back at 2:25 p.m. for our next segment. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iain. Thank you, Clementine. Thank you, Folarin.
The global food loss and waste tracker platform that will help you in managing and reducing your food waste by providing new insights automatically about the food waste that your household produces. To keep up to date with what IntelliDigest is doing, please sign up for our newsletter. And now, let me show you how the platform works. We will go to my account page. And here you can see there are different options that you can choose from. However, for households, the most applicable one will be update food waste. Here you can see that we have edible food waste and inedible food waste. Edible food waste refers to food waste that otherwise would have been edible but was still wasted. Examples for such would be leftover food that has gone bad in the fridge, and so on. Whereas for inedible food waste, it's things like fruit peels, vegetable peels that normal people wouldn't eat. Here you can input the weight of your food waste, let's say 1 kilogram. Then you can select the type of food waste, let's say fiber. Then moisture content, if you can estimate, let's say 10% in this case, since it's fiber, it contains less water. Then the platform automatically calculates the greenhouse gas emissions that would otherwise have been released into the atmosphere. And then you can also select the currency, which will show you the monetary value of your food waste. If you click update, it will update the system. If you go back to my account page, you can view performance charts for daily, weekly, monthly, and annually. Let's check the weekly one now. Here on the weekly chart, you can see food waste for each day and the amount of kilogram that has been produced by the household. Then you can also view food waste on the map by location. So you can compare how you are producing your food waste compared to other households, places, businesses. Finally, there are also some food waste reduction tips that can help you prevent producing food waste. Thank you. And if you want to contact us with any questions or ideas, suggestions that you may have, please do so in the contact page.
Buongiorno e benvenuti all'interno della piattaforma Global Food Loss and Waste Tracker. Sono molto lieta di far parte di questa missione per salvare il cibo, risparmiare denaro, salvare la terra dal cambiamento climatico e porre fine alla fame. È incredibile essere in grado di misurare, tracciare e prevenire lo spreco di cibo. Su questa pagina mi sono iscritta alla newsletter di IntelliDigest per tenermi aggiornata su ciò che IntelliDigest sta facendo. Sono molto entusiasta del potenziale di Global Food Loss and Waste Tracker. Lasciate ora che vi mostri come funziona la piattaforma. Per prima cosa andremo alla pagina About. In questa pagina troveremo le informazioni sul perché Global Food Loss and Waste Tracker è vitale per affrontare le sfide del sistema alimentare globale, i benefici, i termini utilizzati nella piattaforma e come fornire alcune delle informazioni necessarie per misurare, tracciare e prevenire lo spreco alimentare. Per favore, prendetevi del tempo per rivedere i dettagli sulla pagina About, perché questo renderà ancora più facile l'utilizzo dell'applicazione. Io personalmente l'ho trovato molto utile. Se sei nuovo all'interno dell'applicazione, per favore vai in fondo alla pagina di login e seleziona Click Here per registrarti. È molto importante selezionare la giusta building function, perché questo influirà sull'inserimento dei dati necessari. Fornire il resto dei dettagli durante l'iscrizione aumenterà il beneficio che potrete ottenere dalla piattaforma. Leggi attentamente i termini, le condizioni e l'informativa sulla privacy. Clicca il pulsante Sign Up e riceverai una mail di verifica e dopodiché sarai iscritto. Una volta iscritto potrai accedere alla pagina del tuo account personale. Come prima cosa vai su Update Food Waste, che cambierà in Update Food Loss se sei un agricoltore. Aggiungi il nome del cibo e sentiti libero di usare il nome locale del tuo cibo. Io in questo caso scriverò arancia. Successivamente seleziona se il cibo è commestibile o non commestibile e per favore controlla la pagina con le tue informazioni per la definizione. Aggiungi il peso o il volume della tua bilancia, in questo caso io inserirò 500 grammi. Successivamente seleziona se il cibo è prodotto localmente oppure se è importato. Fornisci dettagli sulla composizione dell'alimento e fai riferimento alla pagina About per la definizione. In questo caso metterò un 50% dei carboidrati contenuti, proteine un 10%, solamente un 2% dei grassi e 20% per quanto riguarda le fibre, infine anche la percentuale sull'umidità, 90%. Non ci resta che schiacciare Update. A questo punto il Global Food Loss and Waste Tracker calcolerà automaticamente l'emissione di gas serra e il costo economico dei rifiuti alimentari in base ai dati forniti e li registrerà all'interno del tuo account. Ritorna sulla pagina del tuo account personale e clicca su View Food Waste Performance Chart per visualizzare il tuo record sulla composizione dei rifiuti alimentari, il peso, l'emissione di gas serra e il costo economico. Ci sono 4 opzioni principali: Daily, Weekly, Monthly, Yearly. Da qui potremo vedere il nostro grafico. Torna sul tuo account principale e clicca su View Food Waste Map. Qua visualizzerai una mappa degli utenti a livello globale. Personalmente trovo questa mappa molto utile perché mi permette di sapere che molte altre persone sono desiderose di essere parte di questo grande progetto e porre fine allo spreco di cibo e alla fame. Infine, torna alla pagina del tuo account. Clicca su Food Waste Reduction Tips per alcuni suggerimenti che puoi iniziare ad applicare immediatamente. Per ulteriori informazioni inerenti alla piattaforma, non esitare a contattarci nella sezione Contact. Qui potrai inserire un messaggio diretto, contattarci per telefono, contattarci via email oppure puoi trovarci a questo indirizzo. Ti ringrazio per l'attenzione.
ग्लोबल फूड लॉस एंड वेस्ट ट्रैकर प्लेटफॉर्म में आपको खुश आमदीद। ये ऐप आपके घर के खाने पीने वाले फजल के बारे में खुद ब खुद हिसाब रख सकता है। आपके खाने के फसले को संभालने और कम करने में मदद फराहम करेगा। IntelliDigest जो कुछ कर रहा है उसके मुताबिक अपडेट रहने के लिए बराए मेहरबानी हमारे न्यूज़लेटर के लिए साइन अप करें। और अब मैं आपको दिखाता हूँ प्लेटफॉर्म कैसे काम करता है। हम मेरे अकाउंट पर जाएंगे। ये वो सफ़ा है जहां आप खाने के फसल से मुतल्लिक मालूमात कर सकते हैं और अगर ज़रूरत हो तो खुद ही अपडेट भी कर सकते हैं। अपडेट फूड वेस्ट और अपडेट फूड लॉस के बटनों से। खाने को ज़ाया करने का सफ़ा ज़्यादातर घरेलू और मेहमान नवाजी के कारोबार के लिए होता है, जबकि खाने का नुकसान का सफ़ा फूड सप्लाई चेन में मुख्तलिफ इदारों के लिए होता है, जैसे कि प्रोडक्शन, प्रोसेसिंग, स्टोरेज और तकसीम से मुतल्लिक इदारों से। दोनों ही सूरतों में खाने के काबिल और खाने के नाकाबिल के दरमियान फ़र्क करते हैं। यहाँ पर आप में खाने का वज़न डाल सकते हैं और अगर आप जानते हैं किस किस्म का खाना है वो भी डाल सकते हैं और आगे से मॉइस्चर कंटेंट भी डाल सकते हैं। फिर ये हिसाब लगाएगा ग्रीन हाउस गैस एमिशंस के मुतल्लिक और उसकी कीमत के मुतल्लिक भी। आपके खाने के फजले के रिकॉर्ड का जायज़ा लेने के लिए आप माई अकाउंट पर जाएं और व्यू फूड वेस्ट परफॉर्मेंस चार्ट दबाएं। इसमें लिखा है कि रोज़ाना, हफ्तावार, महीना और सालाना कितना खाना आपके घर में ज़ाया होता है। इसके साथ आप दूसरी मुख्तलिफ जगहों में कितना खाना ज़ाया होता है वो भी देख सकते हैं व्यू फूड वेस्ट मैप के ज़रिए से। और आप ये भी देख सकते हैं कि खाने के फजले को कम करने के तौर तरीके फूड वेस्ट रिडक्शन टिप्स के ज़रिए भी देख सकते हैं। प्लेटफॉर्म और स्मार्ट स्केल के बारे में मज़ीद मालूमात के लिए हमसे राब्ता करें।
Mutatom, hogy hogyan is működik a platform. Ez az az oldal, ahol közvetlenül tudod nyomon követni a háztartásod élelmiszeri hulladékát súly szerint, napi, heti, hónapi vagy pedig évi szinten, mint ahogy látni itt. A weboldal databázisa automatikusan van frissítve egy okos mércén keresztül, ami követi az élelmiszer és hulladék kuka súlyát. Viszont manuális adatbevitel is lehetséges, abban az esetben, ha a mérce nem működni megfelelően. Az élelmiszeri hulladék 2 típusra osztható fel ebben az esetben, az ehető és ehetetlen kategóriákba. Az ehető kategóriába azok az élelmiszerek tartoznak, amik normális esetben biztonságosak emberi fogyasztásra, viszont vagy maradék, vagy pedig megromlott élelemről van szó. Az ehetetlen kategóriában főleg a zöldségek és gyümölcsök azon részei tartoznak, amit általában nem fogyasztanak az emberek, mint például burgonya vagy hagymahéja. Aztán a platform a hulladék súlyából, típusából és nedvesség tartalmából számolja ki a lehetséges, megelőzhető üvegházhatású gázok
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. And for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Lisa Lamy, and I have the honor of chairing this fantastic webinar today on behalf of IntelliDigest, where we are speaking with a number of experts about not just what are the facts in terms of food loss and waste, but more importantly, what can we be doing about it, both on a personal level as well as on an institutional level? And I'm going to ask people, you know the drill, to keep your phones on mute unless you are speaking. For this next section, as I was just saying, we will have heard from various international organizations on their plan, and we're now looking to see what is the actual support to address. So we know the problem, what is going to be the solution? And so it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. His name is John Prentice. He has worked on the family farm since 1989, and he has a very diverse farm. It's both in terms of cattle as well as crop. So he has a 1,200-acre farm that runs a beef suckler herd, 800 breeding ewes, 300 arable acres of barley, wheat, vining peas, fodder crops, and 200 acres of woodland, which might be also part of his environmental conservation, but he'll tell us. John is also a director of the local lamb marketing cooperative and chair of the Village Development Trust. So John, absolute pleasure to welcome you to this segment this afternoon. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much for the chance to speak. I've enjoyed very much the presentation so far. I recognise a lot of what Professor Alonge was talking about, food waste in the developing world. We have exactly the same problems here. I grow vining peas and I see my field get bypassed every now and again for all the reasons he quotes, and that waste goes right through. So today, because I've been beaten to the post by Dr. Alonge and some others, I'll talk about the sustainability side a bit more and agriculture from a personal point of view. I'm interested in the green side of farming. In 2011, I put up an 11 kilowatt turbine just to power the steading. And then a year later, I went on to develop 3 800 kilowatt turbines, which were a much bigger prospect, which I quite enjoyed, I must say. And then in 2015, I went on and installed a biomass boiler to heat the houses here on the farm. And they're quite neat. They use the wood chips I chopped down my own trees to make. So they're surprisingly green. This is a mixed farm, as you've just heard. And it's a good, flexible farm. It can cope with different climates and it can cope with different financial situations because we're a mixed enterprise. Last year, I went on and did a carbon audit with SRUC to see what our carbon situation was. It was quite an education. I did enjoy going through all the details, and this is the end result. As you can see, it's expressed in kilograms of carbon equivalent per kilogram of product, and it's very involved. So if I just move on, I've got a simplified version here, which I'll just quickly take you through. So direct emissions are, just burning fossil fuels basically, and there's a straightforward 100 tons of CO2 generated from that. Indirect is interestingly higher. So my fertilizer, much in the news just now, they burn a lot of gas to make fertilizer, which makes it right now extremely expensive. So I'll be using a bit less next year, I expect. Along with lime and feeding and bedding and pesticides, this all has embedded carbon in it. So it's 400 tons of that. The methane is the big one, and you might have heard David Attenborough all imploring us to eat less red meat. Well, it is that enteric fermentation system that our red meat animals use, which causes a problem. Enteric fermentation for us is a significant 760 tons for my 90 cows and their followers. And then moving on to nitrous oxide, this is soil losses. So when I plow I will release nitrous oxide, which is quite a potent greenhouse gas. So inorganic manure made from fertilizer is some of it. It goes some of the gases, and then organic manure from my cattle and my sheep is the other source. So all in all, for me, that comes up to 1,600 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, thankfully, my forestry, I handily have 200 acres of trees. It halves that, so I am effectively giving off 800 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent every year from the farm. So what to do? Local Scottish colleges, Scottish rural colleges are very good, and they have advised me in several ways, but one of their major pieces of advice is to improve my efficiency. So if I just take one example from that, I can change the way I finish my cattle. At the moment, they spend 1 year with their mothers at grass and are out summered. And then their second summer, they spend at grass again before they come inside and are fattened on barley for Christmas. So they're effectively 18, 20 months old before they get sold. Now the colleges recommend that they spend the summer outside with their mothers again as usual, and then they are fattened that following winter. So they have a much shorter life, and they're sold in the spring and middle of the summer the next year. So that's all well and good. Now that will mean I have an extra field of grass. So if you just ignore the slide just now and see that field of grass behind you, but without the cattle in it, that's what I would have by fattening a year sooner. So that field of grass is empty. What can I do with that? I can either put more cattle on, or I can plant trees. If I put more cattle on, I will still, believe it or not, lower my carbon produced per kilogram of beef. And that's, in the Scottish government's eyes, probably a good thing. But it will, on a farm basis, increase my carbon production overall. So if I want to avoid that, I can go for net zero, and I can put trees in that field. Now that is hopefully a good idea. Hopefully over the years, I will increase efficiency by doing other measures, by rotational grazing, and by feeding my cattle a different ration in the winter time. And I will eventually reach a net zero position by freeing up land and then planting that land with trees. So drivers for that change, I've got a liking for market premiums. If someone pays me more for something, I will do it. And I think that will apply to all your waste programs as well. If you can encourage people through the market to put a value on that waste, or put a cost on disposing of that waste. That's a basic way of driving change. I use Angus cattle to get a premium for my cattle when I sell them. I grow seed barley so I can get a premium for my seed. And I try and market my lambs early so I can get a premium on the Easter market for my lambs. So market premiums is my primary driver. Morrison's brought out a pledge last year to say that they intended to buy all their produce, all their farm produce from farms which are net zero in 9 years' time. So by 2030, they intend to only use suppliers who are net zero. And that, I think, will be a driver for progress.
Absolutely.
Yep. Sorry. And subsidies, obviously, every farmer likes subsidies. So subsidy can be used constructively. They are destructive throughout much of the world, but they can be used constructively as well. And then the least favorite is legislation. That's my least favorite one. So that's about us. Finally, I'd just like to say I was a lucky man. I've got a flexible farm. I have 200 acres of woodland already, but many farmers are not so lucky. And I'm sure that policymakers will be sensitive about how they bring in new regulations and try and not deny too many people their livelihood. So I hope that's been interesting, a different take on tonight's talk. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, John. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it or if you mentioned it, but where is your farm? I think it's in Berkwickshire in southern Scotland.
We're south of Edinburgh, southeast Scotland. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. So for all of you out there listening to these great presentations and these great speakers today, just a reminder that you are with us. Please send in your questions, your comments. If you want to be questions for a specific speaker, or if it's a general question to anybody, but please, as they are speaking, remember what it is that you want to discuss, because after this segment, we will be having a panel with all the speakers again. Okay, and so with that, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Sonal Choudhary. She is a senior lecturer in sustainable management at Sheffield University. She's also head of operations management and decision sciences. Basically, she's the head of the research center as well. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Choudhary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction. Just for a very quick update, I'm joining University of York in 2 days as a professor, chair professor in sustainable management. So thank you for having me here today. And today I'll be talking about a couple of my projects focusing on food loss and the food waste. Okay, the first project is on STFC Food Network. STFC stands for Science and Technologies Facility Council. They have different capabilities in and around data science, technologies, and facilities. And what we try to do in this project is that we identify the different challenges at the production level, supply chain level, and the consumer level, and the nutrition, related to the nutrition. Some of the challenges are related to food loss and food waste, and we ran sand pits and we fund the projects. And one of the projects we funded was Ifeyinwa project on global food loss and food waste tracker. And I hope you have enjoyed listening to the tracker during your break time. So this is us. This is the whole team of STFC Food Network. Myself here, along with the 2 project managers, around 9 co-Is and steering committee members, a very good set of champions and liaisons, and Ifey is one of the champions for knowledge exchange there. Okay, so within this project, we have funded more than 60 projects so far. And there have been, I think, 10 projects focusing on food loss and food waste since 2017. One of the projects is looking into the food loss and the food waste challenges, especially related to the fresh produce in India. And I'm going to take you through them, what sort of challenges we identified and what sort of interventions we identified in the project. So we fund these smaller projects to test the ideas, see what it's like to involve different sort of space sciences and the technologies to address some of the challenges. So around 8,000 to 10,000 pounds are funded to the small projects. And then once that is successful, we encourage them to apply for the larger grant project. And this was one of the successful projects that we funded in India. So optimizing cold food chain in India and identifying where the space science and technologies could be helpful there. Now, we identified that there are a lot of challenges in supply chain that is causing food loss and the food waste. So one is, of course, we all know about the lack of cold chain infrastructure in many of the developing or lesser developed countries. Second was demand and supply gap. So there was a data gap in where when the demand was high, the supply was not there enough, and when the demand was low, there was more than enough supply. So that resulted in distress selling, and farmers literally sometimes suiciding and sometimes mostly impacting their livelihood as well. Supply chain visibility is not there. So connecting farmers to the right market is a major challenge, and that results in lower MRP for that results in lower cost selling price for farmers. So because they are selling it in auction and buying at MRP. And then there's lack of standardization related to the trading, warehouse design, transportation, infrastructure, food quality, all the things you can think of. So lack of standardization there. So quickly at a glance, just to give you an overview of what it is like the cold chain. So only 4% of the fresh produce is actually transported by a reefer trucks. So in India, as compared to 90% transported in the UK, and as compared to 70% being transported in Malaysia. So almost 90 to 92% of the industry is dominated by unorganized players. So there is no particular, fully organized supply chain, if you may like to call it. Majority of the refrigerated vehicles are almost 80% of them are carrying milk. Then 75% of the cold storages in India are actually storing potatoes. So there's a lot of a mismatch between what's happening and what's needed in India. So this project was able to find out some of the key challenges there. We also identified first mile connectivity and the last mile connectivity infrastructure gap is there, and we really need to fill that gap before we address any other things. So lack of packing houses, package houses, transportation, resulting in the breach of integrity of the cold chain, so the cold chain breaks. And it results in a lot of losses. Many of the times, the farmers don't even bother to harvest their food produce, and they leave it in their farm, and then cattle comes and graze off. So basically the market price is not enough for them to actually pay for the transportation and go to the market yard and then do the auction. So they just leave it down at the field. So there are different interventions needed for different supply chain nodes. And we found out that there would be many places where science and technology facility councils could help us, especially looking into the lack of cold chain infrastructure. There are capabilities from the space thermal engineering for efficient and cheaper solutions, cheaper installation solutions. There could be use of cryogenics for pre-cooling and for food processing. There could be use of big data analytics, AI, IoT platform for decision support system for farmers, app development for connecting farmers to the consumers, and digital supply chain. And finally, when all these things are there in place, then we can think about blockchain and the transparency and the traceability of the food quality and the food safety. So with that in mind, we applied for the larger grant project, which was around 840,000, and we got funded. And that project is looking into transforming cold food chain in India through space science and technology. What we are doing in that particular project is that we are firstly mapping the whole food chain and identifying the exact leverage points in the partnership development for cold chain incubation hub. We are going to have a kind of demonstration hub. We are looking into the 3 transition pathways that could help us to move towards a better livelihood for farmers. One is democratizing the precision agriculture. So looking into the different sort of data types from soil, from satellite, from markets, how to bring it all together and help farmers understand what to grow, when to grow, that sort of thing.